So welcome everyone to today's session of MedTech Unplugged. Whether you are joining us for the first time today or you've been able to partake in our previous webinars, we thank you and we welcome you. This is a series, as a reminder, where we really dive deep into the strategies and insights that empower professionals to succeed in the medical technology space. So whether you're just entering the industry or you're looking to take that next big step in your career, you're in the right place. This afternoon, we are thrilled to welcome an exceptional speaker and a dear friend of mine who brings decades of insight and real-world experience to today's discussion. Bob Demonte has over 30 years of clinical and commercial expertise in the healthcare and medical device industry. He's a registered nurse by training and a seasoned sales leader by experience, and he's built his career at the intersection of clinical excellence and strategic business development. Throughout his career, Bob has led high-performing teams, he's driven innovation, and consistently delivered meaningful results for both patients and providers. Bob is currently an area vice president at HeartFlow, and he continues to champion a clinically credible sales practice while fostering a culture of accountability, collaboration, and impactful leadership. And today he's going to be sharing some practical, actionable advice to help you with your resume creation and some techniques and some strategies when you have that interview in front of you so you're ready to go. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bob. Bob, glad to have you.
Thanks, Jenny. That was a fantastic introduction. I appreciate the venue and the time to share. And I hope that this is a meaningful exchange for everybody who's on the call today. I have had an unbelievable career path, and I love sharing it. And in the spirit of having kids of my own that are similar age, right out of college, I really understand the importance of sort of having a good foundational understanding of what a good job hunt looks like, what a great resume should look like, and sort of the do's and don'ts of the process. And I won't lie in that these are the household arguments that exist all the time in my house of, hey, did you do this? Did you do this? Do you follow up? And it's just interesting. I think we're in this sort of genre of different age segments and different sort of cultures and sort of how we approach an interview process. And so I'll give a little bit of a preamble of, I think I'm a little bit old school in the way that I kind of grew up and sort of interviewed and did things. And I'll also say, I think COVID changed the universe, and I think we're all adapting to a new world. And I think I found sort of a sweet spot in the middle. But I think I'd like to start with maybe letting you know a little bit about who I am and sort of my background. And just as a sort of point of record, I'm going to give you maybe a 3 to 5 minute background of my career right now that I think is a great example of what you should all be able to speak to in an interview, because any interview is going to start out with, who are you? Tell us more about yourself. Listen to the things that I include in it and don't include, and really pay attention to sort of the story. You're telling a story about yourself. And I wanted to start there before I dig into the resume, but I'll start now. So my name is Bob Demonte. I live in Southern California. I am from a little town called San Pedro here in Southern California. Come from a big Italian family. I went to USC where I got my nursing degree, and I worked in the ICU and the ER for a period of 7 years in Southern Cal across many emergency rooms and intensive care units. During that time, obviously, you get to expose to the clinical sort of arm of a hospital, and you get to see how sort of everything works in a hospital, not only from the patient care perspective, but also the business side, the products that get used, the personalities, the styles of different people, your bosses, your supervisors, the people you work around. You work with more senior people when you're a new person, and there's a lot that you can really pull from that experience. About 7 years into being an ICU nurse, I got offered to be a clinical specialist at a medical device startup company. And it was actually a patient's son who actually talked to me about the potential of a role that happened to be at the hospital where they needed exposure, which was USC University in LA, which is now Keck. And so I actually jumped ship and took off my scrubs and put on a suit. And I spent the first 3 months at a company called Rita Medical Systems, which was an oncology device company. And it was a technology called radio frequency ablation, where we actually ablated unresectable cancer tumors. I did that for 3 months, and I became a sales rep within 3 months. Uh, Managed the entire Southwest of the United States, and really kind of just went full bore right into sales. Right around that time is when drug-eluting stents became a really big deal, and that really sort of parlayed my interventional cardiology experience. So Boston Scientific had just invented a new stent called Taxus. It was sort of the second to market drug-eluting stent. And so I went to Boston Scientific, where I was able to parlay sort of my sales and clinical experience into now pure sales rep in the field at a medical device company with a new innovation, a drug-eluting stent. I did that for 9 years in Southern California, across several large hospitals from Cedars-Sinai all the way to Scripps in San Diego, and really learned a lot in that role about how to utilize relationships and your clinical credibility to sell, and really to embark on a journey of being clinically credible, because people buy from people they trust and they know bring that kind of experience to the role. From Boston Scientific, I went to a company called Abbott Vascular, where I also was an interventional cardiology rep. And about halfway through my experience there, I became what we call a regional sales director, which was a manager of the team for the entire SoCal market. I managed a team of about 15 people, and we sold everything from intravascular imaging to all the interventional cardiology supplies, from guide wires to drug-eluting stents to balloons. Anything you would use in an angioplasty, we pretty much sold. From that experience, I got this incredibly rare opportunity to become a regional sales director at a company called Shockwave Medical, which was a new invention in cardiology, and a technology called intravascular lithotripsy. And in essence, it was a really less invasive way of cracking calcium in the heart. And it was really an innovation like none other. In my previous two roles, I sold a device, which in essence is a drill that drills the heart out of calcium. And you can imagine how invasive that sounds and the kind of complications that can come from it. Intravascular lithotripsy really changed the market by just being able to inflate a balloon. You can crack calcium and really without any complications for patients. I was able to, hence this conversation, in essence, hire my whole team. So imagine this is a startup, and I had New Mexico to Hawaii, and I actually hired 43 people in the span of 3.5 years and built out the entire markets. And if you know anything about startups, the way that it works is you sort of have one rep, and then you get enough sales to justify a second rep, and then you get a second rep, and you keep doing that to this point where you start to split out and sort of organize a larger sales team. And so I just left Shockwave Medical. They were purchased by Johnson & Johnson, i.e. a very successful startup process when you get bought by a large company. And I got the opportunity to get a promotion and come to a new cardiology startup called HeartFlow. And in that role is where I'm currently managing 8 states, a team of 15 direct reports and 22 indirect reports. And in essence, we're selling now a non-invasive test that is used through CT scanners. And it's an AI technology that extrapolates the data from a CT scan and can then give a patient a full report and 3D image of their cardiovascular arteries, and tell you what's blocked and not, and can also tell you the type of plaque you have and what percent, and quantify the plaque, which if you think about it, it's in essence, this test will become the colonoscopy or the mammogram of the heart. So when you turn 45, the test you're going to get, this is sort of what that test is going to become. And so I'm married. I have 2 kids. I have a son who's graduating college. I have a daughter who's graduating high school. I live in Fullerton, California, where I've lived in SoCal for most of my life. And that's sort of me. So I'll stop there. Anything I missed, Jenny?
Other than the crazy stories along the way, I think you captured
Yeah.
it.
That's fantastic. So the reason I like to do that is in any interview that I do, I ask any candidate that sits down with me, besides your resume, to really give me a snapshot of who you are. And it's an opportunity for you in the interview process to sort of bring out key elements of what you did and what you sold, or sort of what you went through, to sort of compel your story to the person interviewing you. So everybody should really be comfortable talking about themselves, and maybe sometimes what you learned from a role, what you didn't like about the role, what challenged you, what inspired you for your next role. Those little things end up becoming really important nuggets. I'll add something else that is actually becoming a bigger deal, especially in California. As a hiring manager, you have to be very careful about what you ask candidates. In essence, I can't ask if you're married. I can't ask if you have kids. I can't ask your sex. I can't ask a lot of things about you personally anymore because that's really in the eyes of fair practice, hiring practices. So I'm going to reverse engineer that. I always want the person interviewing me to not ever be put in that uncomfortable situation of trying to find things out about me. I try to put everything out there. Let them know where you live. Let them know your family, what you like to do. Tell them about your hobbies. The more you can tell the interviewer, the easier you make it and the more comfortable they're going to become with you, because you got to understand there is now a lot of legality around hiring and the decisions that are made. And so I always like to bring that up to people, that don't be afraid to tell them about who you are, because oftentimes they may not ask because they can't. And that's why I like bringing that up. So I'll stop there. Any questions to this point? And I'll dig into the resume next.
I don't see any yet in the chat, and it
Perfect.
doesn't look like anyone's yet raising their hand, but when you have a question, please feel free to post it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get your questions answered, and we'll have plenty of time for that throughout the discussion and at the end as well. But I don't see any right now.
So I'm going to pull up my resume, and I'm just going to use my resume as a talking point. And through that process, let me see, let me know when you see it.
Yep, we're good.
Got it? Perfect. So this is the current resume that I use to get the job I'm in today. And I want to go over it in sort of more detail. And I want to sort of compel you to sort of the whys and the why nots of what a resume is and isn't. And we'll kind of talk through some of the process after I dig in the resume. But I can tell you, I'm hiring 2 people right now in 2 roles. And in both positions, I had 55 to 75 people apply for 2 open positions. So as a hiring manager, the first interaction I get is the resume. And I want to really reinforce to this group that it's the quickest snapshot. I'm going to look at a resume for probably a minute or less, and I'm going to look for some very key things. And I'm not going to read every word on it. And so I'm going to dig into the elements of this resume and why I put them there and why they're in the order they are. But I'll start at the top. I'm a big fan of pictures. And the reason is we've become a Zoom world and we've become a digital world, and we can do a lot of things without ever seeing a human being. And unfortunately, a name is just a name, and that's all it is. And for people, especially in sales and people that work with people, they want to know who you're talking to. They want to see remember what you look like. Who is this guy? And I will tell you, the people that have had pictures on their resumes, I am far more likely to remember their resume than if they didn't. And so that's sort of step one. Biggest mistakes I see with resumes, if you look at the very top, I have my name, I have my address, my cell, and my email. I can't tell you how many times where I'm actually trying to communicate with someone that applied for a job and I can't find their email address or their phone number because they didn't put it there. And another big one is people are not putting their addresses on their resumes anymore. And I think there's a motive behind that because people like to work remote and people don't want to be edged out of a job because of where they live. But I can tell you, in a sales world, I need to hire somebody that lives in the geography. I'm not going to hire somebody from Boston to work in Southern California. And if you don't put the address there, I almost naturally have to exclude you because I don't know where you live. And so think about just that top segment. If I don't see all that information there and I have a question mark, I'm less likely to proceed forward because there's gaps, and I have to assume if the address isn't on there, they don't live in the geography. And I've actually done the follow-up several times, and whenever people don't put it there, they typically don't live in the geography. And think of a sales perspective, I want somebody that lives there, that has relationships there, that is already plug and play. I don't want to deal with a move. I don't want somebody that's going to take 2 months to get here, that has to now find a place to live, doesn't know where to live, doesn't know what hospitals are here, doesn't know the specialties or the key opinion leaders of the space. So I want people that are local. And that is a big depiction of that in the title. Summary, a lot of people do it, and I still am a big believer of it. It's sort of like a little mantra of who you are. And I actually am a big fan of it. I'm not sure that everybody reads it, but what I like to do is highlight certain words so that if somebody's just screening it quickly, Like I capitalize people. Sales is all about people. I put patience there. I put 30 years so people know I'm experienced, even if they didn't read it all, that they can see that, hey, there's this guy's been around a while and he cares about people. And especially as a people leader, somebody who manages a team, there's really important words that people look for in management styles, and that is the ability to be transparent, a team-minded approach, positivity. How do you work through adversity? Are you able to hold people accountable? I like to put those keywords in there. Education, and this is a hot one. I get this is the most common mistake made in a resume, and I've actually done some research on this. A lot of people put their education at the bottom of the resume, and I have found that the one thing I always end up looking for in the process of screening a resume is I want to know where the person went to school. It is really the first moment, the first challenge you had in your life, and it's a quick snapshot of, hey, where did this person go to school? What did they get their degree in? What did they spend 4 or 5 years of their life gritting out to get to this place in their life? And I also like, I think you'll be surprised, and obviously I went to USC, which is a big networking community. People that go to SC look for people that go to SC. And so I like putting the pictures on there so that somebody that looked at my resume can see I'm a bald Italian guy and I went to SC. And if there's 2 things that they take away from my resume, those are things I want them to remember. Then it goes back to, think of like when you go shopping at Albertsons, all the brand recognition that takes place when you shop. Some people buy Del Monte ketchup. Some people buy Heinz. Some people have certain brands of things that you buy or don't buy based on your experience with those products. It is no different with employers. And so I also put pictures next to my experience and my title so that people that have brand recognition that work in my space will go, oh my God, I worked at Boston Scientific. Oh, I remember Abbott. I know that company well. It's a big company. They made the COVID test when COVID hit. Oh my God, Shockwave, very successful startup that just happened. And now HeartFlow, what's HeartFlow? Maybe they don't know what that is. And so next to each picture is your title, the dates you worked. Don't ever feel like you have to put the actual day. I'm a big believer in the months. And the reason behind that is you're all going to get a background check when you get hired. And the one thing that they will do is they will look at the actual dates, and you don't want to be wrong. And I've actually run into this where somebody said they started in April, and I look at the background check and it said they actually got fired. Like all of a sudden it ended in February. Now that's a gap in employment that I'd want to know about what happened there. But if it's just April and you left in April, and maybe it's April 1st to 30th, nobody has to know that. What you don't want to do is contradict a background check. And so try to be kind of more broad, but thoughtful. And remember, these background checks are pretty amazing now. You'll be surprised what they can pick out. They now track your education. They'll certify your education. They'll certify your job experience. They'll certify your address. They'll do a credit check. It's pretty extraordinary what people can extract from the background checks. And so you don't want your resume to contradict what might be uncovered during that final step in being hired at a hiring as part of the background check. So put the date, and then what the biggest mistakes I see made underneath the description of your role is people say that they're really good about broadly talking about the kind of business they're in, but they never say what they sold. Don't be afraid to talk about tactically, actually, the product you sold. What is the product that you actually specialized in? FFRCT, a test for coronary artery disease patients. If you go down to my Shockwave experience, intravascular lithotripsy. If you go down to Abbott, drug-eluting stents, balloons, OCT, FFR, guide wires. All of those little things are very meaningful to the person interviewing you, because some of these companies are so large, you could work at Abbott for a lifetime and not know what a drug-eluting stent is. There is a nutritional division, there's a diagnostic division, and so just working at Abbott isn't enough to tell the hiring manager what it is your experience is in. And then don't be afraid to put some of your awards underneath each of your positions, and you don't have to do everything, but you want to show that you had success when you did. And then I do it chronologically from current to past. And then I put my nursing stuff. And then I always put in, if you have a license or certificate, these are important things, especially in certain roles where you need to have certain credentials and licenses to get into certain positions. I have a nursing license that I still keep up. I want people to know that I am a registered nurse in the state of California. I passed the CCRN exam, and I'm going to remember to empower people hiring me to know that I do have these licenses. And then this is an interesting one. The professional development and interests, believe it or not, people actually look at that. A lot of people have been through professional development programs that are well known, but the ones I always get a lot of comments about is USC football, family, cooking. People want to know a little bit more about you in the personal side, because we become somewhat robotic in an interview and we start talking about our business and what we did and all the things that we do in our job. But a job is 8 hours a day. There's still, a 16 hours of the day where you're not working, and people want to know what that side of you is about. Don't be afraid to parlay some of that information in a resume. The other thing, I want you to look at this resume and see one page, and it can be it's quite complicated to learn how to cliff note information, especially as your career gets long like mine. But I do it intentionally. One page is all you'll ever get. That's all I'm ever going to read. I have seen resumes as long as 20 pages, 15 pages. And I'll even tell you, on this particular document that I'm showing you, I specifically put into a PDF, because when you send a document across the numerous application sites that you will apply to, they will get lost in translation. And the reason I know it is because I see what they look like when they get sent. Number one mistake, LinkedIn. Don't apply for the job on the LinkedIn button. It completely reformats your resume to the point that I've had people's words with just letters and icons. It doesn't even have words on it. It just completely reformats some people's resumes because of the incompatibility between LinkedIn and whatever it is, the site they're using. So always use the site that you're applying to. So if you're applying to HeartFlow, go to the HeartFlow site and apply there, because then when you input that information, it will go with whatever their HR management system is, and it's built to import that data. And PDF size matters. When you start getting into Excel and PowerPoint, you'd be surprised between Apple and Microsoft how things can really kind of get lost as you come across multiple formats. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions, any comments to this point.
We've had a couple of questions come through, but I think you've addressed a number of these. The big question that came up, and I think you hit on this a couple of times, and your last point about the LinkedIn and your resume reformatting was spot on. But in general, the question is, you've seen countless resumes over your career. What's the one or two most common mistakes that immediately stand out to you?
No address. I don't know where you live. And even though you may work at a company, I don't know what you did, because you didn't describe to me in the words underneath what exactly you do. If I don't know what you did there based upon the few 4 or 5 lines of data underneath, you've made a mistake. You want the hiring manager to know, even if it doesn't align, to know exactly what it is you did. The questions will come at an interview. Right now, the resume is really your path to an interview. And so you want to be as colorful and highlight in the most granular possible way, in 1 page or less, everything about you. And so those would be the biggest two. The third would be the education at the bottom. A lot of times the prerequisite is to have a bachelor's degree to take on a lot of these roles. And I also think that education is a really good snapshot of somebody's past, where they went, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to go to Harvard. Like, I'll tell you, I love gritty candidates that say I went to JC and transferred to Cal State San Bernardino, and I see the effort and I see the work and I see how they gritted it out. But I want it up top because I want to know your path to your professional career, because what we learn in school does have an impact on what we actually do in our professions. And if you got a bachelor's degree in communications, it's more of an ambiguous degree, but I want to know where that was from, and maybe know what that experience was about. Where did you live? Because college is a meaningful experience in all of our lives. And I think that would be the third biggest mistake I see taking place. People putting it at the bottom of the resume. And I'll use an example. My own son just did this. He just applied to a job, and he argued with me for 20 minutes about, Dad, my son graduated from USC. And the instructor at USC told him to put it at the bottom of the resume. And I actually went online and did a search on this, and it actually said it should always go at the top. The only exception is if you have a lot of work experience, that it's not as relevant. But I think it is very relevant in any job that you want to parlay your degree. And I actually love it when people put color pictures. Let me see where you're from. Like, put your little, mascot on there. Somebody goes to the University of Texas or Harvard, whatever it might be. Like, be proud of, you earned that degree. Not to mention, I'm sure many of you are still paying for them. So it's something you should definitely get credit for.
Yeah.
Those would be the top three.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we get commonly, and this is part of the resume creation, but it also something that dovetails into the interview process. And for many of our attendees today, a lot of them are coming from engineering, health science, even business degrees, but they're recent grads. And they're looking for the best way to translate their academic experience into something meaningful on a medtech resume, particularly when they haven't had years of experience working in similar roles. So how can they best translate that, whether it's through a resume or in a discussion in an interview process?
All right. So, one is the digital world we live in today can connect us in ways that didn't exist in the past. And so I'll say there's a very meaningful habit of LinkedIn is a very powerful tool. And what you can do, and what I tell candidates very similar to you that are coming out of college and want to get into medical device, I always tell them the first thing you need to think about is what is it you want to do and what you want to sell. So in my world, it's about sales. What specialty do you want to sell in? Maybe they say it's interventional cardiology. So then I'll say, all right, so you need to do your own diligence. And I want you to think about, if you want to work in interventional cardiology, what are the 4 or 5 relevant companies in that space that own that space? And follow them on LinkedIn, get to know what they sell, understand their products. The websites are super meaningful, and follow them on LinkedIn, because then all of a sudden what you'll start to see is when positions come up, they're going to show up right on your feed. And you're going to start getting in the habit of, oh, there's a position here and I can apply for it. And now I can go through the process. I just had this happen with 2 people in the last 30 days. They called me, how do I get a medical device? I said, follow these 5 companies on LinkedIn. And I actually saw a job when I was with the person. I said, apply for it. I knew the hiring manager. She called, I sent the resume, she got the job. It can be just that simple, of just doing your diligence on the internet and connecting yourself to the company that you want to work for. I had a period of time where I had a gap of about 2 months between employers. And what I did is I spent every morning searching the companies I wanted to work for. So I made a list of those companies, and I would spend 10 to 15 minutes on their site every day, learning about the company and seeing, and you can go right to their careers and it'll show you all the positions that are available, and scrub it every day and get in the habit of doing that. And then you'll start to see what they're looking for. What are the requirements for those jobs? And then one day you're going to be looking, it's going to be the role that you exactly want or something similar. And then you can apply for it. But a lot of times you have to sort of garden your career and find your way to where you want to be. And that's been a really effective way of bridging that gap. Another is sort of finding the job before the job. And I think that, every industry has a pyramid where there's sort of the high pay, really hard to get job. But at the bottom of that pyramid are sort of those entry-level roles that maybe don't pay as well, but you can cut your teeth and really show them who you are and integrate yourself. I'll use the example of interventional cardiology. A lot of people start in interventional cardiology with closure. So it's an actual device that closes the artery after an angioplasty. It's a very cookie cutter sort of job. There's a lot of competition. It's a low cost item. There is some clinical expertise required, but it's really a lot of cold calling. And a lot of people that end up getting those jobs end up parlaying into sales jobs with the more advanced products as you move on.
Great. We're getting a couple of questions, and these are wonderful questions, so keep them coming, everybody. But how to leverage, so twofold, how should they leverage this? And also, where and how should they have this included on their resume? things like extracurricular activities, clubs, organizations that they're in that might be relevant, as well as how to just parlay any work experience, even if it doesn't seem tremendously relevant for the job they're going for a future role. So
Yeah. So
part of
I
that.
think yes and yes.
Okay.
One, I always put this professional development and interest can be a place. What I've seen very commonly, people will put their fraternities, sororities therein. I actually like seeing that. I mean, this is somebody, I'm in a sales world. Like, I want somebody that's social, that knows how to be with people, that knows how to create relationships. Like, I actually think that's wonderful. So it can go at the bottom, and you can retitle these sort of last two boundaries as license and certificates, professional development interest. You can brand this any way you want, but it is a good spot to put that kind of stuff. And then what was the second part of the question?
Just the best way to leverage, for example, if they've had minimal work experience, the best way to leverage that for
Yeah.
establishing competency for a future role.
So the way I kind of interpret that question, and I've seen it a lot, and actually I like this when I hire. There are people that will put when they bartended or were waiters at Chili's in advance of their real career job, and they'll put it on there. And I actually love that. I think it's a gritty thing. So you can put that at the bottom, but this little segment of your work experience should be chronological. So it should be the furthest away to the most recent at the top. But don't be afraid to put those experiences at the bottom, especially when you're new and you don't have a lot of work experience. I'll give my son as an example. So he worked at the media center at Annenberg. So he's a journalism major at USC. He has no work experience, but he worked at the media center, and he also worked in the newsroom. And so his work experience, because he doesn't really have a job, was working at the media center and working at the Annenberg Center and being a director and a producer. And he put all of those down, even though they weren't necessarily career jobs. They were part of his college experience, but they were relevant to his last 4 years. Those were things he was involved in and spent a lot of time doing that were outside of his classes, that were extra on top of. And people want to see that, especially if you're trying to get a job in journalism.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another question came in, and this is one that I know a lot of people have a different opinion on. And it's the question about the worry that if I put a photo up there, am I opening the door to any kind of discrimination? And I know we live in such a visual world with social media. I've got my picture on LinkedIn as well as all my other social sites. So my image is out there if anybody really wants to find it. What are your thoughts on that? And I know you've shared you like seeing it, but what are your thoughts about the concern that might open the door to any kind of discrimination?
First of all, nobody wants to discriminate in any hiring process. For me, it's about the overwhelming nature of trying to screen 75 people. And I have to now make a lot of guesses about people when I don't know where they live. I don't know what year they graduated college. And I'm not saying that those are things that I should or shouldn't use in a hiring process, but how is it that I can determine somebody's level of experience without knowing how long they've been doing and what years they did it? And I think the picture is an important piece. Also recognize that a picture can be edited and chopped, and even this picture of me is probably a much younger version of it than my real picture. And so I also understand that people can put any version of themselves they want there. I've even seen people put icons of things that are important to them instead of a picture. But like, I've seen people put their college logo there, something that they're passionate about. There was one woman that was passionate about horses. She put like horses on there, a picture of horses, because that was something that was like, and I like that. Like it helps me assign that person to something from an imagery perspective. And I'll also say it really depends on your degree. I'm in the sales world. I would never hire somebody that I didn't meet with in person. So I'm going to find out anyway what it is. All these I'm going to get all those questions answered in an in-person interview. But I'll admit, the sooner you start to show those and get those questions answered, the more likely you're going to be considered for an interview. And if you can't answer those questions in that first screening, you're more likely to get excluded, from my opinion.
Mm.
And I'll give you the example of why this happened. In my first manager job, I went to an interview class, and they taught us how to interview, and it was like a 3-day program. I learned it at Abbott. And I remember my first interviewing process, two of the candidates put pictures and everybody else didn't. And I printed all the resumes and I went to Starbucks and I was like, really wanted to be thoughtful about narrowing down who it is I wanted to do a phone screen on. And I remember I never forgot the two that had the picture on there because the other people were faceless to me. And so I think you kind of reverse engineer. Maybe it's not a discrimination thing, but you want to know, like, you don't want to be faceless, because being faceless there's a lot of unknowns that come with that versus identifying exactly who you are. And I like to think most of hiring is fair. I really do genuinely believe, like, people do try to do the right things here. People believe in diversity. HRs are accountable to that. There isn't a resume that comes across any of these systems that has to have a screening, has to have a rationale as to why they were either move forward or not move forward. And there has to be a very objective criteria utilized, like doesn't live in geography, non-relevant experience, no experience in cardiology. Maybe they're ortho rep. And like those are very tangible, objective criteria that are fair in being used. And this is how we sort of get the cream to rise. Like, who are those top 3 to 5 candidates in this pool that are the best ones and the best fit for this job? And having a face to it, I think matters. But I can appreciate the concern.
Yeah, no, I think it's great as well. I recently had a discussion with a hiring manager who had an internship, and he showed up for an interest session at a university out in Southern California, and over 70 candidates showed up wanting to talk about that internship with him and have their resume reviewed. And talk about a way to make yourself memorable. If he can connect a face to someone he spoke
Yep.
with, it's just going to
Yeah.
make you more memorable.
And there's also that awkward first time in-person interview where you're looking for the guy who's about or woman that's about to interview you and you don't know what they look like. Like, I know what you look like. It was on your resume. I kind of generally know, like, that's probably the guy sitting at the couch waiting is probably my next candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Versus me having the awkward, hey, sir, are you here for an interview? Are you here for an interview? Like that awkward sort of introduction. I think it just helps connect the dots.
I agree. We had another great question come in with regards to resumes, and then I think it'll be fun to dovetail into some questions with regards to the interview process. But the question that's come in is, what are the big boxes that need to be checked for you when you're reviewing resumes in selecting who you'd like to move forward with to interview as you're screening through these resumes? So what has to hit the boxes for you to go, yes, I want to move forward and have a discussion?
I'm going to say that it's not concrete, because every hiring pool and process is its own thing. Meaning, I could have a position available today in a market and not get great candidates that fit that role. So I have to learn to adapt to the candidate pool that I have. And so remember, you don't know what you're going up against. I've had pools of people where nobody had relevant experience, or I had 3 really experienced people with bad reputations in the market and 2 brand new people that have no experience. And those 2 people that had experience ended up getting the job, or didn't have the experience, ended up getting the job. And so you never know what the pool is going to be. The one thing that I'll say that I've learned, probably having done 300 interviews in the last maybe 10 years, is drive. I am hiring for drive. I am starting to look past experience, because I've seen many times where I can hire the most experienced person and their work ethic is poor. They come with bad habits. They're not 60 miles an hour all day. They're 10 miles an hour a day. They have very set ideas and how they do their job because they're set in their ways. I want somebody adaptable. I want somebody hungry. And drive, I would argue, is the most important thing that I hire for outside of experience.
So with that, and you're touching on to a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's, okay, you've got the interview, you're ready to sit down with the hiring manager. What is the biggest thing that signals to you that this candidate sitting in front of you truly understands the medtech space?
doing your diligence. If there's one thing to take away from this conversation, don't show up to an interview without a library of information about that company, that person, elements of their device or products that they sell. People that do their diligence, that's I would argue, the most important thing you need to get across, that you care so much about this job that you showed up not only knowing who was going to hire you, but you knew things about their product or their business, and that you had thoughtful questions to ask during that interview to help you learn and become more educated about the role you're potentially going for. The interview process is definitely an art. And I'll say there's things that people do that are unbelievable during interviews. One, eye contact is very important. Posture, body position, the way you dress. I've had people show up in t-shirts. I've had people show up in suits. I've had people show up in their work attire in the job that they didn't even say on their resume was there. So there's some interesting segments.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, we work in such a world where oftentimes, to your point, we are remote, and I think the thought is everything can be casual, and you have to remember you're entering a professional environment. You know,
Right.
it may be casual Friday in the office, but it's important to remember this is your one chance to present you at your best and as
Yes.
polished as you can be, as
Agreed.
buffed up as you can be. You may be in a role where, yes, you're going to be wearing scrubs all day long, but it's not what you should be showing up to an interview wearing.
Agreed. And then I'm Jenny, I'm 4% on my battery on
Okay,
my computer. So I want to be, if I drop, that's why I dropped.
no
I
problem.
started with a full tank.
We'll
The
get,
one other piece that I'll mention is never miss an opportunity to meet with somebody in person over versus Zoom. And I've had 3 people that I've offered to meet in person convert it to, hey, can you just meet on Zoom? And I'm like, I'm the hiring manager and I'm asking you to go get a coffee and you want to do Zoom. To me, that is like a critical mistake. Like, especially in sales, this is about people. It's about people interacting with people. And an in-person interview, connecting with another human being in person is far more meaningful than anything we can accomplish on Zoom. And unfortunately, the world is moving that way, and it's making us much more transactional. And I prefer to be around people that aren't transactional. I prefer to be around people that are authentic and real, and look in my face and we can share a conversation and smiles.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's the perfect end point for our discussion today. And you've covered so much, Bob. Thank you tremendously for sharing your experience, your tips and tricks on the resume creation, on how to approach an interview and how you can really stand out. Many of you probably are going to have questions after the fact. Please feel free to email them in, and we'll be happy to get your questions answered. So with that, I want to conclude our discussion today. Again, stay tuned for MedTech Unplugged, brought to you by the Navro MedTech Recruiting Platform. We hope to see you next month, and we appreciate your participation today. Once again, additional questions that you have, please feel free to send them in, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for joining.